Most people believe wealth is built in big dramatic moments like getting a higher salary, landing a lucky investment, or starting a successful side income. But the uncomfortable truth is that none of those moments matter as much as people think, because your financial future is actually shaped in a much smaller window of time that most people completely ignore. And that is the first 5 minutes after your salary hits your account. Not the month, not the year, not even the paycheck itself, but those first 5 minutes when your emotions are at their peak. Your discipline is at its weakest, and your brain is actively trying to reward you for surviving another work cycle. And in that exact moment, your mind stops behaving like a rational planner and starts behaving like a reward system that whispers things like, "You worked hard for this. You deserve something. Just spend a little. You can save later." And this is where most financial lives are quietly decided without people realizing it. Because what feels like harmless spending in the moment becomes a repeating pattern every single month, and over time, that pattern becomes the difference between financial freedom and financial stress, between money that grows and money that disappears. And if you zoom into that moment even further, you'll notice something most people never think about. Salary doesn't arrive in silence. It arrives with emotion attached to it, a notification sound, a quick glance at the bank app, a small pause in the middle of a busy day, and suddenly there is relief. Not real wealth, not stability, just relief. And relief is dangerous because it lowers resistance. In that exact 3 to 5 minute window, your brain is not calculating long-term outcomes. It is scanning for immediate reward. That is why decisions begin happening faster than logic can respond. It starts small: ordering food, opening a shopping app, checking a subscription you might need, or just browsing what's possible. Nothing feels serious in that moment because the amount is small, the intention feels harmless, and the justification is already prepared in advance. I worked hard. I deserve this. But what makes this dangerous is not the size of the decision, it is the repetition of it. Because one small emotional purchase does not change your life, but the same pattern repeated every payday quietly rewrites your financial future. And over time, without noticing, you begin to build a system where money enters your account and immediately begins leaving through emotional leaks that feel justified individually but destructive collectively. Now, if you compare two people earning the same income, living in the same city, and even having similar lifestyles, you would expect similar financial outcomes. But years later, the difference becomes obvious. One person constantly feels behind, stressed about bills, waiting for the next paycheck just to reset the cycle. The other slowly builds savings, investments, and stability without necessarily earning dramatically more. And the difference is not intelligence, not luck, not even income level. It is simply what they do in those first 5 minutes after getting paid. Because the moment money enters your account, it enters a psychological battlefield. Every impulse feels justified. Every purchase feels small. Every delay in saving feels harmless. Your brain is no longer in planning mode. It is in reward mode. And reward mode is terrible at building wealth. Here is the first pattern most people fall into: the spender mindset. Salary arrives, and within minutes it starts leaving. Food delivery apps open automatically. Online shopping feels like a reward system finally activated. Subscriptions suddenly feel worth it. Small upgrades feel overdue. Emotional purchases feel necessary. And none of these decisions are irrational in isolation. That is the trap. Individually, they look harmless. Collectively, they drain the account faster than expected. And by the end of the week, the money feels like it disappeared on its own, leaving behind confusion and the quiet question: where did it all go? Then comes the second pattern: the inconsistent saver. This person has intention. They genuinely want to save. They tell themselves they will save what remains at the end of the month. On paper, it sounds logical. In reality, it almost never works, because expenses do not stay fixed. They expand. Lifestyle adapts to availability. If money is visible in the account, it becomes mentally available for spending. And the more available it feels, the more it gets absorbed into convenience decisions, last-minute plans, and emotional choices that were never planned at the beginning of the month. This is where an uncomfortable truth shows up. Lifestyle always expands to match income. Not because people are careless, but because human behavior is designed to normalize comfort. Once comfort increases, it stops feeling like luxury and starts feeling like baseline. That is why saving whatever is left rarely works in real life. There is rarely anything left. And over time, this creates a cycle where income increases but wealth does not. Effort increases, but financial progress feels stuck, and people end up working harder every year while still feeling like they are running in place. Now, here is where the shift happens, because there is a third group of people who behave completely differently, and their difference has nothing to do with income, intelligence, or financial knowledge. It has everything to do with structure. They understand something most people ignore. Money must be directed before emotion enters the system, not after it. Instead of waiting to see what happens with their salary, they decide what happens first. They remove decision-making from the emotional moment entirely, because discipline is not something you rely on. It is something you design. And this is where those first 5 minutes become powerful, because that is the only window where your financial direction is still flexible before habits, emotions, and impulses take over. In this group, the first action after salary is not spending and not waiting. It is assigning. Every dollar gets a job immediately. A portion goes into savings. A portion goes into investments. Bills are handled. Obligations are cleared. And what remains becomes the only money available for spending, without guilt and without confusion. And this works not because it is complicated, but because it removes friction. When money leaves your main account before you can emotionally access it, you eliminate the internal negotiation that destroys discipline. Because money sitting in your account does not feel like a number. It feels like availability. And availability creates temptation. Temptation creates delay. Delay creates inconsistency. And inconsistency destroys wealth over time. This is why automation becomes one of the most powerful financial tools available. It replaces willpower with systems. And systems always outperform motivation, especially in repetitive decisions like monthly salary management. Motivation changes daily, discipline fluctuates weekly, but automation stays constant. So instead of relying on yourself to make the right decision every month, you create a structure where the right decision happens automatically. Savings transfer immediately after salary arrives. Investments are deducted before spending begins. Bills are paid without emotional involvement. And once this system is in place, something subtle starts to change. Financial stress reduces, not because income has increased, but because decision fatigue has decreased. And your relationship with money becomes calmer because you are no longer constantly negotiating with yourself. Meanwhile, others continue living in a cycle where every month begins with optimism and ends with confusion. Spending feels unplanned but justified. Saving feels postponed. Improvement always feels like something that will happen next month. And that creates a dangerous illusion that financial progress is always in the future, even though nothing structurally changes. Now, imagine a very specific moment. Salary hits the account at 9:03 a.m. The notification appears. There is a pause, maybe even a small smile. At 9:04, relief sets in. At 9:05, the brain begins scanning options. At 9:06, a food app is open. At 9:07, a cart is being built somewhere online. And by 9:08, a decision has already been made that was never planned the day before. And that is the invisible moment where financial direction gets chosen. Not in big decisions, not in investment strategies, but in tiny emotional reactions that feel insignificant in real time, but compound dramatically over years. If instead of reacting, you simply redirected that moment, even once, even partially, everything starts to shift. Because small, consistent redirections compound faster than people expect. Even small automated savings begin building momentum. Debt becomes easier to manage because it is no longer ignored. Emergency expenses feel less threatening because buffers already exist. But something even deeper begins to change. Identity. You stop thinking in terms of what is left and start thinking in terms of what is assigned. And that shift is powerful because it removes randomness from your financial life and replaces it with structure. And when structure exists, outcomes stop being unpredictable. And when outcomes become predictable, financial anxiety starts to disappear. Zooming out, the idea becomes surprisingly simple. Financial freedom is not created by rare opportunities or sudden breakthroughs. It is created by repeated behavior that is small enough to ignore but consistent enough to compound. And the first repetition of that behavior happens every single time you get paid. But there is one more layer most people miss. Even when they understand this idea, they still fail. Not because they lack knowledge, but because they rely on memory instead of systems. They tell themselves, "I'll be disciplined this time." But discipline is weakest in emotional moments. And payday is designed to be emotional. It is relief, reward, and excitement all at once. And that combination breaks intention, which is why the goal is not to try harder. It is to remove the need to try at all. Because when you do that, money stops feeling like something you manage in crisis mode and starts feeling like something that moves on rails, predictable, structured, automatic. And once that happens, something subtle but powerful changes. Your decisions become intentional instead of reactive. Your stress reduces, not because you have more money, but because you are no longer redeciding the same thing every month. And that mental space is where real financial growth actually begins. Because in the end, those first 5 minutes are never just 5 minutes. They are the smallest moment that quietly decides the largest direction of your life. And every version of your financial future is already being rehearsed inside that tiny window. The only question is whether you are the one directing it or your impulses are. Follow, share, like Wealth Narrate for such personal finance topics.